We're going to go right through the basics of EV ownership. And then we're going to talk about some of the environmental considerations associated with owning an EV. We'll discuss charger trends and forecasts so you can see where different chargers are going to be going. We'll go through charger basics, incentives for vehicles and chargers. I'll address some common misconceptions associated with owning an EV, and then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A with some of our EV drivers. So to kick things off, we're going to dive right into the history of EVs. And for those of you that aren't history buffs, I'll try to keep it brief for you. So the first successful EV debuted in the US around 1890. It was created by a chemist in Iowa named William Morrison. And it was a 6-passenger vehicle with a top speed of 14 miles an hour, which at the time was pretty impressive. Now by 1900s, the electric vehicles made up about 1/3 of all of the vehicles that were on the roadways. And as time went on, technology advanced, passenger vehicles became available in 3 different fuel types in the early 1900s. That was gasoline, steam, and of course, electric. Now, electric vehicles were really popular, especially with women at the time, because they were very quiet, they had limited fumes, very limited emissions, and they were fairly easy to operate as compared to their gasoline counterparts. But then later on, Ford released its Model T in 1908, which actually sparked the decline of EV popularity due to the Model T's low cost and high availability. At the time, EVs cost around $1,700 to purchase new, whereas the Model T cost only $650. Now, by the 1920s, gas became really cheap. It was far more abundant, roadways expanded, and EVs eventually became the less favorable option because of their limited range and speed. Now, after the launch of the Model T, EVs really went into the dark ages until about the 1960s. In the 60s and 70s, the US faced soaring oil prices, gasoline shortage, and it really sparked a newfound interest in the electric vehicle. Now, in 1976, Congress passed the Electric and Hybrid Vehicle Research, Development, and Demonstration Act, kind of a mouthful, which authorized the Energy Department to support electric and hybrid vehicle research. But even after that research, EVs they still couldn't compete with the internal combustion engine. And shortly thereafter, gasoline prices dropped, gasoline again became more abundant. And although the EVs continued to be worked upon in the past, they just became the less favorable option again. Now, fast forward to the 1990s, when new federal emissions really sparked another interest in EVs. Those were emissions regulations. Now, at this point, EVs had pretty improved performance overall as compared to their 1970s elders, with an improved range of about 60 miles at that point versus, the 14 miles or so that we saw in the 1900s. Now, during the 90s, GM produced the EV1, which you can actually see here pictured on the screen. But unfortunately, it was never really mass produced because of the high production costs of the batteries at the time. Again, EVs sort of fell to the wayside due to lack of public interest. But again, even with that lack of public interest going on, the US Energy Department was still working behind the scenes to improve the EV technology and sort of build out better, more affordable batteries. Now, in the late 1990s, we see a shift starting to take place, and EVs really see a new beginning. The Toyota Prius Prime, which is pictured here on the screen, was mass produced in Japan in 1997 and really gained significant popularity amongst celebrities here in the US. And then shortly thereafter, Tesla Motors, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with at this point, announced their startup in 2006. Now, as we all know, Tesla became a very successful company, which spurred a lot of other automakers to really accelerate their own work with electric vehicles. Now, in 2010, Chevy released their Volt with a V, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and Nissan released their Leaf, which was a fully electric or battery electric vehicle. Now, with public interest in the EVs growing, and the US Department initiated the Recovery Act, which led to the installation of over 18,000 residential and public EV charging stations across the country. So at this point, we're starting to see more EVs hit the market and more chargers to support those vehicles. So now that we've discussed the history of EVs, I just want to take a brief break to show this video. Just going to turn up my volume really quickly so folks can hear it okay.
What if everything ran on gas? Then again, what if everything didn't? The 100% electric, zero gas Nissan Leaf. Innovation for the planet, innovation for all.
Now, I really love this video because I think it shows us that we already power so many things with electricity. So why not our cars? You know, it just seems to make sense. Alrighty, so now let's take a look at recent EV market trends and forecasts because, you know, we already know the history at this point. So as you can see from this graph on the screen, the number of new or original electric vehicles in New York has grown dramatically since 2011. Now, I just want to note that these figures represent new EV registrations and they don't account for registrations of pre-owned EVs. Now, as you can see, in 2011, there were less than 1,000 new electric vehicle registrations. Jump 10 years ahead to 2021, and there were nearly 40,000 new EV registrations in the state of New York, most of which being fully electric vehicles, meaning not hybrid or plug-in hybrid, fully electric. Now, in the last slide, we saw the number of new EVs registered in the state. Now we're looking at the total number of EVs on the road in New York as of January 1st of this year, which is over 91,000. 42,000 were plug-in hybrid vehicles and 49,000 were battery or fully electric vehicles. Now, as you can see from the map here, EV adoption is pretty widespread throughout the entire state of New York, but we have a very high concentration around New York City, the 5 boroughs, and of course, all across Long Island. So it's pretty significant. Now, I ask you to remember the EV adoption here on Long Island for when we talk a little bit about charging stations, because you'll see a strong correlation between the number of charging stations and the number of EVs in a given area. So now that we know that EVs are really prevalent on the roadways, and adoption is, of course, steadily increasing, we're now going to move into the basics of EV ownership. So there are 3 types of electric vehicles. The first, which we've been talking about a little bit here, you've heard us say the phrase a couple times, is the battery electric vehicle, or the BEV as they're sometimes called. These vehicles are powered solely by an engine, a battery engine that has no gasoline or gas engine components. Most BEVs are capable of fast and level 2 charging and have 0 tailpipe emissions. Now, you'll hear us talk a little bit about charging types in the first part of this presentation, but we'll really dive into those charging types as we get further along. Now, the next type of electric vehicle is the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or the PHEV. Now, that's comprised of a battery-powered engine, which is plugged in, and a gasoline-powered engine. Now, it's those 2 major components. Now, PHEVs, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, can only charge via a level 2 charger, not a fast charger. And the third type is the hybrid electric vehicle, or the HEV. Those are low-emission vehicles that use an electric motor to assist the gas-powered engines, and these vehicles do not require any sort of charge. Now, here are a few examples of the 2022 battery electric vehicles that are either available on the market today or will be available sometime this year. The cost of these BEVs, battery electric vehicles, range from about $82,000 MSRP for the Tesla Model S, all the way down to about $27,000 for the Nissan Leaf. Now, the range of these vehicles varies quite a bit as well. The Tesla Model S has a range of over 370 miles, whereas the Nissan Leaf has a range of about 150 miles, which meets the needs of most daily travelers. Now, most EVs, like the Chevy Bolt or the Hyundai Kona that you see on the screen, fall in about the mid $30,000 range for a brand new vehicle and have about a 250-mile range. Now here we have a few 2022 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that again are either currently available on the market or will be later this year.
Yeah.
The cost of these PHEVs, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, range from about $70,000 for the Audi A7 to about $25,000 for the Hyundai Ioniq. The range of these vehicles, of course, varies as well. The Hyundai Ioniq has an EV range of about 29 miles, that's that plug-in engine, and an overall range, gas included, of 630 miles. The Mitsubishi Outlander has an EV range of 24 miles and an overall range of 320 miles when combined with the gasoline and the electric. Now, most new PHEVs, like the Ford Escape or the Mitsubishi Outlander, fall again in about the mid $30,000 range for a new vehicle and have about a 400-mile range on one charge and one tank of gasoline. Now, I just want to take a moment here to go over some of the considerations of owning an EV, because there are just a few things to be aware of. The first that I always like to tell people about is that EVs are incredibly quiet. Actually, people are often shocked at how little noise the vehicles actually make. When you hear one drive by, typically all you hear is the tires on the roadway. You don't hear any noise associated with the engine or the exhaust. Now, the next is that there's little to no vibration with EVs like there is with some gasoline-powered vehicles, especially the older models. Now, the next is that EV batteries actually consist of many small batteries that can be replaced as needed. So if one is faulty or, eventually over time it fails, you can replace small components of it at a time without having to do the entire battery at once. Now, EV batteries have an estimated lifespan of about 10 years. Now, with that being said, most manufacturers have very significant warranties that cover the battery replacements up to a certain mileage or age. And just to make you aware, battery replacements for the entire unit is about $10,000 or less. Now, again, you can replace smaller components as well as needed, but typically in the lifespan of the vehicle, it's not necessary. Now, another consideration is that EVs accelerate very quickly. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that already. The next is that electric vehicles use regenerative braking technology that draws energy from the vehicle's momentum, which is then sent back to the battery. Now, this makes the wear and tear on the brake pads far less than that of conventional or regular vehicles, as Karen mentioned. EVs also have decreased operating costs as compared to gasoline vehicles because there's no oil, so you don't have to go get an oil change and replace the filter. There are far fewer moving parts in the vehicle, and EVs receive over-the-air updates that are sent directly from the manufacturer. So that means that there's much less of a need for those costly trips over to maintenance shops. And the final one that I like to note, especially as a Mainer, is that certain features of the vehicle can impact the range of the vehicle. So for example, when driving an EV in the Northeast winter climate, drivers can expect some decrease in overall range if they're using the heating or cooling accessories of the vehicle. Now, additional load like snow can also decrease the range of the vehicle until it's cleared off. So if you've got a decent amount of snow on the top of your vehicle, you're using your heated steering wheel and you have the heat blasting at you, you can expect about a 25% decrease in your overall range. Now, this graph illustrates gasoline and electricity costs per gallon of gasoline equivalent from April of 2000 to October of 2020 across the US. Now, as you can see, the cost of electricity per gallon of gasoline equivalent stays relatively stable around $1.30. Now, gasoline, on the other hand, which is this blue line that you can see, is quite variable, and it's got an average cost around $3 per gallon. And actually, this average cost has probably gone up quite a bit over the past couple of weeks. Now, from this graph, you can see that electricity prices are quite predictable and are less than half the cost per gallon of fuel as compared to gasoline. So it's far cheaper to fuel your EV than it is to fuel your gasoline-powered vehicle, especially in today's times. Now, after learning about the dynamic gasoline prices, my question to everybody is, which curve would you rather be on? This steadily declining curve of renewable energy prices, or this really variable curve of gasoline prices? I think that's more of a rhetorical question. Now, at this point, I wanted to share some incentives for buying electric vehicles. And of course, there are quite a few that help to encourage people to go EV. Now, some of which include the $7,500 federal tax credit that's available until 2,000 EVs are sold by original equipment manufacturers, or
200,000, Kaylee.
Oh, sorry, 200,000. Thank you. There's also the Drive Clean rebate that's offered through New York State. And that's sort of a tiered rebate. So there's a $2,000 rebate for EVs with a range that is greater than 200 miles. There's a $1,000 rebate for EVs with a range between 40 and 199 miles. There's a $500 rebate for EVs with a range of less than 40 miles, and a $500 rebate for EVs with an MSRP value that's greater than $42,000. Now, if you can remember from a couple slides back, most EVs fell right in the mid $30,000 price range, so they would be eligible for a number of these New York State rebates. Now, a couple other fun incentives that I just like to discuss is the exemption from the annual emission inspection requirements, so you can save a couple dollars annually there, and access to the HOV lanes regardless of how many people are in your vehicle. Now, at this point, I'd like to talk about some of the environmental considerations associated with owning an EV. Now, EVs and PHEVs running only on electricity have zero tailpipe emissions, but emissions may be produced by the source of electrical power, such as the power plant. Now, in geographic areas that use relatively low polluting energy sources for electricity generation, PHEVs and EVs typically have lower emissions than similar conventional vehicles running on gasoline or diesel. Now, in regions that depend very heavily on coal, for example, or other fossil fuels for electricity generation, EVs may not demonstrate a very strong emissions benefit overall, but still do have somewhat of a benefit. Now, in New York State, which is what these figures here represent, most electricity is generated from natural gas, nuclear, or hydro sources, meaning that EVs have a much lower carbon footprint than internal combustion engine counterparts in the state. And another thing to note is in 2019, New York State set a goal of generating 100% of its electricity using renewable sources by 2040. So what does this mean? The electric grid and EVs are only going to get cleaner. So you're only going to see fewer and fewer emissions associated with these EVs over time. Now, another very common question that we get that I like to address is what happens to these batteries after their useful lifespan in the vehicle? So let's say I'm driving my EV for 10 plus years and I do have to get a full replacement at some point down the road. A lot of folks are curious, what does happen to those? And the answer is that 95% are recycled or repurposed, and they're done in one of three ways. Now, the first is smelting, which is a process to recover the very basic elements of the battery, like lithium. The second is direct recovery, where components of the battery are separated by physical and chemical processes to recover the various materials and metals, which are then recycled individually. And then finally, there's repurposing, where the batteries are given a brand new life in another battery-powered object, like streetlights, for example. So they don't go to a landfill like most people think. Now, at this point, we're going to dive into part 5 of our discussion today, which is EV charging basics. Now, I always like to note, just like how you may charge your phone overnight or at your desk while you're working, EV charging works just the same. Now, most people charge their EV in a personal level 2 station overnight at their homes while they sleep, or they do it at their workplace during the day if their workplace has some charging stations available. That way, whenever you're ready to go or take off, you've got a full charge. The publicly available level 2 and DC fast chargers are really great for road trips or for people that are traveling quite a bit. But most EV owners charge their vehicles right at home overnight. And that's actually when charging and electricity is at its cheapest. Now, there are 3 different types of chargers, and I think you might remember I mentioned early on how we were discussing a few. This is when we're going to dive into what those 3 different types of charging, or those charging types are. Now, the first, we're going to start all the way on this side, is level 1 charging. Now, when a driver plugs their car into a standard wall outlet, like I'm sure you've got right next to you, that's level 1 charging. It's the most basic type of charging that there is. But for people who don't drive a lot each day and who are able to drive at home, level 1 charging is a very convenient way to charge because it doesn't require installing a level 2 station at your home. And actually, most electric vehicles on the market come with a level 1 charger right in the vehicle. So you plug one end right into your standard wall outlet and the other end right into your vehicle, and it will slowly charge that vehicle over time. Now, from 0 all the way up to a full battery charge, depending on the vehicle and how old the battery is, will take about 20 hours on average. The next type of charging is level 2 charging, and that utilizes a 240 volt circuit, like the kind used for electric dryers, for example. They charge a lot faster than level 1 chargers. They take about 5 to 6 hours on average to charge a battery all the way out from 0. And they're most found where vehicles are parked for a significant amount of time. So like at one's home or at the workplace. But you can also find level 2 charging stations in public locations such as malls or other shopping centers or libraries, for example. And the final type of charging that I wanted to discuss is fast charging, or sometimes it's called DC fast charging for direct current. Now, if level 1 and level 2 chargers are like dial-up internet, then DC fast charging is like the fiber optic internet. When charging on level 1 or 2, electric vehicles convert AC power from the grid to DC power to recharge the battery. Now, DC fast chargers do this conversion internally using a much larger grid connection and deliver that DC power directly to the vehicle, which results in a much faster and more powerful charge. Now, I like to tell people this too. Using one of the DC fast chargers and plugging that into your vehicle and turning it on requires a big draw from the grid, and it's equivalent to actually, turning on all the lights in a Walmart. So it's a pretty big draw. But now, as the industry has evolved, EV battery sizes have increased to provide greater driving range, as we learned from the brief history of EVs. The power of fast chargers has also evolved and increased to fill these batteries at the fastest times possible, because people are very used to refueling their vehicle in 5 minutes or less at a gas station. Now, fast chargers today can charge an EV battery from empty in about 15 to 45 minutes on average. And these types of chargers are typically available at rest stops or major shopping centers like Walmart's, for example. But they typically do cost some sort of fee for usage. It can be for time used or the amount of electricity that's pulled into the vehicle. Now, it's also pertinent to note that charging time is dependent on the size of the battery and the charging capacity of the vehicle and the charger itself. Now, as I mentioned, these numbers on the slide are just averages. Charging times can really vary based on how much you drive your EV and how often you charge. And just like a cell phone battery, the battery capacity of your EV can slightly decrease over time and can take a little bit longer to charge to the maximum capacity with more usage. It's also pertinent to note, though, that the average commuter drives about 40 miles a day in the US. Knowing this, one could plug in their EV overnight at their level 2 charger, as most EV owners do, and have a full charge in about 1 hour. So at this point, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different connector types associated with those EV chargers. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is this guy right towards the middle called the CCS. That is the industry standard. And in North America, all newly manufactured passenger EVs, except for Tesla, will use this CCS connector. Tesla connectors are found exclusively on the Tesla vehicles, and that looks a little bit like this. I always think this one looks a little bit like a frog. Now, because Tesla was one of the first EVs to market with fast charging, they designed their own connector, which is why it's a little bit different from the industry standard, the CCS. Now, Tesla sells adapters for their EVs that allow the Tesla drivers to charge their EVs at non-Tesla stations. Then there is the J1772 connector, kind of a mouthful, but that's used for level 1 and level 2 charging. Now, of course, you know, level 1 and 2 are considerably slower than DC fast and are primarily meant for charging over just a few hours. The J1772 connector, also known as the J-plug sometimes, is used by all EVs, again, except for Tesla, for AC or level 1 and 2 charging. Now, just a little note on adapters here, because I know sometimes folks like to go shopping for them if they want, to have their Tesla charge on a normal CCS charger or vice versa. Adapters are the devices that enable a charger to be compatible with one standard or another. Now, although there are several standards existing on the industry, and you can see a couple different ones here on the screen, there are actually very few adapters on the market. Now, the use of these adapters is really not recommended because adapters add an additional part to the electrical connection between the EV and the charging station, which increases the probability of faults and can actually affect the functional safety. So I always note to people, try to avoid the adapters if you can. Now, it's recommended that you select the correct charger that is compatible with your EV, like the CCS or the J-plug that you see on the side here. Now, similar to EV incentives, there are also incentives to help with the purchase of chargers. PSEG Long Island offers a residential rebate that's $500 towards the purchase of a residential level 2 charging station. And depending on the charging station that you pick for a level 2, the $500 can typically cover the entire cost of the charging station. There's also another rebate that is offered through New York. It's a rebate for both public and private entities toward the purchase and installation of a level 2 charger at public parking facilities, workplaces, or multi-unit dwellings like apartments. This current rebate is up to $4,000 per charging port. And you're probably wondering why that's so much more than this PSEG rebate right here for $500. And that's because this also covers the installation. A lot of times in more public spaces, they have to do a bit more work with installation versus what they would do at your home, because they might have to take up a portion of the parking lot and run conduits that are necessary to this charging station because it requires that 240 volt circuit. A lot of folks, it's very easy to install that right at your home, and a lot of folks actually have it already in their garages. So I wanted to talk next about charging stations and the charging station locators. There are several different station locators available, but one of the most commonly used ones is offered through the Alternative Fuels Data Center. And it shows all public charging stations and details quite a bit of information about these stations. It shows information like the charger location, the charging types, so whether that's level 1, level 2, or the DC fast. It shows the different connector types like the J-plug, the CCS, or the Tesla. It also details any payment types if that is a charger that accepts payments, and it will also show the available hours. Now, one interesting aspect of EVs to note is that most EVs actually have the mapping technology built right into the vehicle, and they'll tell you where the nearest chargers are located and when they need to charge. And I also just want to pause here and talk a little bit about this map. So if you can remember, we saw a pretty significant amount of EVs that were registered right on Long Island. And as you can see from all of these little green dots, these are all different charging stations. So you can see that there's a pretty widespread amount of charging stations all across Long Island, and of course, a pretty high density amount of them too in New York City. Now, the next topic that we're going to dive into is EV charger trends and forecasts. Now, as you can see from this graph, the number of publicly available EV charging stations has increased dramatically since 2010. In 2010, there were only 14 public EV charging ports available across the state of New York. At the end of 2021, there were over 6,000 level 2, those are the medium charging stations, and there were over 1,000 DC fast charging ports available in the state of New York. And these numbers are just expected to continue rising as the demand for electric vehicles and charging stations increases. And I would suspect that we'll see another increase over the next couple of weeks here with the inflated gas prices as well. Now, like the number of new EVs, the number of charging stations, of course, is expected to continue growing over the next 5 to 10 years. And as you know, public charging growth is essential to drive EV adoption and, of course, alleviate that range anxiety that some people have associated with adopting an EV. Now, at this point, we're going to dive into common misconceptions associated with EVs. And this will just sort of really hit home some of the things that we've talked about throughout this presentation. Now, the first one is that EVs don't have enough range. So that's sort of that range anxiety that people get. Now, Americans drive an average of 40 miles a day, according to the US DOT. Even the shortest range electric vehicle, like the Nissan Leaf, can travel more than twice that distance before needing to be tethered to a power grid. Among affordable EVs, the Nissan Leaf, as I mentioned, can run for an average of 150 miles on a charge, while the Chevy Bolt EV ups the ante to 238 miles. So they do have pretty significant range that's very comparable to gasoline vehicles. The second is that EVs are just as dirty as conventional internal combustion engine vehicles. Now, electric motors convert 75% of the chemical energy from the batteries to the wheels. Now, by comparison, the internal combustion engine vehicles only convert 20% of that energy that is stored in gasoline. Now, what's more, EVs emit no direct tailpipe pollutants. Now, some argue that they still pollute the atmosphere, at least indirectly, via the power plants that produce the electricity necessary to operate them. Now, as we saw earlier, EVs tend to fare best in this regard when charged in parts of California, New York, and other Pacific Northwest regions where renewable energy resources are quite prevalent. In areas that are more central in the US, like Colorado, Kansas, and Missouri, that have a greater dependence on fossil fuels, EVs won't show quite as strong as an emission savings, but still they produce less emissions overall than gasoline vehicles. Now, the third is that EV batteries don't last long and will eventually wind up in landfills. Now, electric vehicles are federally mandated to carry separate warranties for their battery packs for at least 8 years or 100,000 miles. And according to published reports, Nissan Leaf models that were used as taxi cabs retained over 75% of their battery capacity after 120,000 miles on the road. And a Tesla owner is said to be able to have 90% of their car's battery intact after 200,000 miles. Now, once depleted, EV batteries, like 99% of the batteries in conventional cars, of course, can be recycled, as we learned earlier. So they don't wind up in landfills, and they do last quite a long time. Now, the fourth, driving an EV won't save money in operating costs based on today's gas prices. Well, we all know that's not true. Now, even with the cost of gasoline, when it was affordable, it was still cheaper to keep an electric vehicle running. Now, for example, the EPA says the Hyundai Ioniq will cost an owner $500 a year to traverse 15,000 miles, based on average electricity rates. That amounts to an estimated $5,000 less than the average vehicle owner will spend in fuel costs over a 5-year period for a gasoline vehicle. So they're far cheaper to fuel and maintain. Now, the last common misconception that I wanted to address is that the power grid won't be able to handle the hundreds of thousands of EVs that are expected down the road. Now, according to a report conducted by Navigant Research, the nation can add millions of electric cars to our current power system without having to build any new power plants. Much of this has to do with the fact that most electric vehicles tend to be charged at night during off-peak hours when power demand tends to be at its very lowest. Now, at this point, we'll dive into our final section, which is the wrap up, and I'm going to point you to a few resources that will just further the learning of what we've gone through today. Now, I know that we covered an awful lot, but I hope that you enjoyed this material and that you learned something new or something of value. Now, to continue this learning, I encourage you to reach out to us at Drive Electric Long Island anytime with additional questions to learn more about EVs, questions relating to what we've gone through today, anything of that nature, you can reach out to us. But before we jump into the Q&A with some of the EV drivers, I just want to point you to a few resources that I think might be helpful for you to refer to down the road to continue your learning. Now, there's the Drive Electric Long Island resource page that has links to various incentives, learning materials, and much more. There is the Alternative Fuels database that's managed by the Department of Energy. It has in-depth EV and charging station information, as well as that station locator, which we saw earlier. There is the New York State Energy Research and Development NYSERDA EV and charger website that has more information on incentives, EV and charger forecasts, and just general EV information. And finally, there's myself and Rosemary at Drive Electric Long Island, who again, you can reach out to anytime via email or phone with questions. Before we dive into the Q&A, I just wanted to thank everybody for your time this evening. I know it might be a little difficult coming out, staying up late on a Monday, but we hope that you enjoyed this learning session and that we can connect with you again in the future.
Thank you, Kaylee. So I would like now to introduce our EV enthusiasts. We have a group of EV owners that volunteer with Drive Electric Long Island on events like this to answer your questions. So I'll give you a little, their name and the car they drive. So Kaylee is actually an EV driver. She drives the Hyundai Ioniq, as does Mark Gouch, also drives a Hyundai Ioniq. We have two that drive a Chevy Bolt. It's Chris Fresco and Carl Muehlbauer. And then our own host here from Middle Country Library, Lucas Jennings, drives a Honda Clarity, which is a plug-in hybrid. So the first 4 individuals drive full electric, and Lucas drives a plug-in hybrid. So thank you all for joining us today. I am going to go into the chat now and just bring up the questions, and we'll read through them. And if you have questions as we're going through this, please enter them to the chat and I will get to them. Okay, give me 1 second. A little bit through what the interests were. I think we hit on most of the interests. I want to learn more about them and what's coming next, and if it will be possible to recharge them at home with solar panels.
I can speak to this one, Rosemary. I think that's a wonderful question, because if you're using a solar panel to add fuel to your charger and then of course charge your vehicle, that is just full circle. That is so clean, and that's one of the best ways that you can charge your EV, because there are no emissions associated with that. And you can absolutely install solar panels at your home. Of course, you'd have to work with an electrician, but you can absolutely install those solar panels at home to provide electricity to your charging station and then to your vehicle. That is absolutely something that you can do. That's a great question.
Now on Long Island, when you put in your solar panels, it's something called net metering, where the electricity that's generated gets credited to your account. And then when you use electricity to charge your vehicle, it goes against that credit. So you're still hooked up to PSCG Long Island, but you do save. And as a matter of fact, if you have excess electricity from your solar panels, it really is the best way to use that excess with a electric vehicle, because otherwise you'll build up credits that you wouldn't use. So a lot of people that have solar panels very interested in getting electric vehicles because they can use that for them. PSCG also has a new time of use rates that you definitely want to look into if you buy an electric vehicle, that provides about a 60% savings overnight in your charging rates, or your charge per kilowatt hour. So typically our incremental cost on Long Island for electricity is about 21 cents per kilowatt hour. That's exclusive of the taxes and the like. With the overnight rates, it's closer to 12 cents a kilowatt hour on the incremental basis. So it's a substantial savings. What that balances out to is that if in the peak hour that really PSCG Long Island's trying to manage to, which is mostly in the summertime, the afternoon when everybody's running the air conditioners, they'll charge more for that hour, but you're in control to be able to run your major appliances and put up your air conditioning, so you're not using as much during that, and you'll save year round with charging your electric vehicles. Another question, does the $500 New York State rebate to install level 2 unit also cover the cost of having an electrician install a 240 circuit and piping? No, that $500 rebate is just for the unit itself. The cost to have an electrician put in a 240 volt or a circuit, there's 2 levels. Does your box support that circuit? And if it does, do you have that plug where you need it? That would be a charge that you would be responsible for.
And Rosemary, I think we missed one question before that. It was from Catherine McConnell. Catherine says, can we expect more rebates for EV purchase in the near future, given the New York State and federal encouragement for EV use? I think that's a great question. And I don't know a whole lot about future incentives that are coming down the pike. But we can certainly keep you well informed of that, and definitely keep various incentive information up on the Drive Electric Long Island website. But Rosemary, are you familiar with any?
Yeah, just there's a lot being proposed in the Build Back Better ad, which we know isn't going, is kind of stalled right now in Congress. They were looking at increasing the federal tax incentive to like $12,000 for US made vehicles. As well as lots of funding for charging infrastructure. So there's a lot of interest, but we don't have it at this point. The $7,500 tax credit is still in place for all but Chevy and Tesla vehicles. Both of those manufacturers have reached their 200,000 vehicle limit. If Congress passes the incentives that have been proposed, then they would put that back in for those manufacturers. But at this point, those aren't available. For New York State, there was a big round of funding for those rebates, so that should be around for a while. They did lower the amount to $500 for vehicles over 42,000, and that was specifically to try to spread the wealth, if you would, of the funding to more vehicles, rather than to give large incentives for what was perceived as people who could afford it, basically. So that should, provide relief. Between the $7,500 tax credit and the $2,000, that's almost $10,000, which gets you to parity with a like for like ICE vehicle. Okay, Gary asks, is it safe to use level 2 charger if I have a pacemaker? Anybody know the answer to that? I would think yes, but
yeah,
anyone?
I would think yes, but I actually jotted that question down because that's not one I've come across before, but I think that's really useful information to know. So Gary, if you want to drop your email in the chat, I'll do a little bit of research on that and get back to you with what I find.
I have a thought on that question.
Sure.
Gary, I mean, if you have a home charger, you're going to plug it in at 8 o'clock at night and it's going to charge after 11 p.m. You're going to be 20, 30, 40, 50 yards away from that charger when it's actually charging. I got a strong suspicion you're not going to be standing right next to your charger while it's charging.
That's a good point. That's a good point. That's part of what the smart chargers do, is it lets you program it to start, and you want to program it to when the electricity rates are lower. Okay. PSCG Long Island partners who offer renewable energy credits with 10% discount. How does this work, and which one, community power, et cetera, to choose? Yes, this is something that has just come to my attention. A new EV enthusiast who isn't on the call today brought this up, that there are some community power and community solar that don't that you can't use the time of use rates with. We're still doing research in that arena. Unless one of my other EV enthusiasts can answer this, I think it's also one we would get back to you on.
Yeah, Rosemary, that was me, so I am on the call.
Oh, okay.
I have the community solar, right? So I use Sun Nation as, you know, they're the ones that set it up. They're not the ones actually own. I don't know if they actually own the panels or not. I'm not sure who owns them, but you know, it's on some other building, not their building. You know, the first year I paid 16 cents a kilowatt hour, and then it went up, well, 1.5%. So it's like 16.25%. I mean, 16.25 cents for the second year. It's a great deal. It's, you know, it's a big saving of like 21, 22 cents that you pay PSE&G. And the way they do it is they look at your existing bill, and they'll allocate you an amount that's less than how much you really use. Of course, you may have to be careful with that if you're just getting an EV, you know, and your use is going to go up a lot. I already had the EV before this, so, you know, I already knew what my usage was. Because I believe
But Carl, with the time of use rates now at about 12 cents per kilowatt hour for the overnight hours, would you switch then? If you went to the time of use? I mean, if you're using the other, which do you think comes out cheaper? Because during the day you're paying 21 cents. This one you're paying, sounds like 16 for the community solar, but overnight you pay the 12. I guess you'd have to work it out and see what your other usage is.
It's hard to calculate, right? Because when you have that time of use, you pay more during the day, right? So if you use a lot of air conditioning, you're gonna get killed by it, I think.
Yeah, you'd pay the typical rates, the typical standard rates for most of the day. And then during the peak hour, you pay substantially more, because that's what they're trying to send you to do, is use it less during that peak hour, so they don't have to build a power plant to meet the demand.
Yeah, I just switched to overnight rate, so I don't know how expensive it will be during the day. But using Sonation service, does the rate change? I think you just get credit for using their electric as source, right?
I'm saying you have to pay Sun Nation this 16.25 cents kilowatt hour, and then that gets subtracted, you know, off your usage from PSE&G.
Oh,
So,
okay.
you know, so it'll vary each month, depending. And you know, if you go over and you generate more than you use that month, they put it in the bank, you know, and over the year, you know, I ended up using more than I generated. So, you know, I made it really well.
And about the time of use rates, PSCG lets you come in and out of that any month. So if you find that the time of use rates isn't working for you, you're not saving, you know, because of your usage patterns, you could switch back to a standard plan. But most people save substantially.
The thing I don't think we really explained was if you use this community solar, they don't let you use the time of day rate, time use rate.
Oh, okay. So that's
Yeah.
my question. There are different companies and, I have to research them all, which was difficult. I just wanted to know if anybody uses them. And then there's going to be wind, which is being built. So will that be even more, affordable, or I don't know.
Well, LIPA will be investing heavily in offshore wind, which will make our grid on Long Island all the greener. So if you buy an EV today and you own it for 10 years or it's 15 years on the road, over time, that same emissions of the power that was used is going to get greener and greener over time as LIPA converts over to more renewable energy over time to meet the New York State goals.
Yeah, I just bought my EV a month ago, so I'm exploring how to make sure my charging energy comes from renewables. So all these options are out there. Yeah.
Right. So Carl, just to clarify, because I'm sorry, I missed who had told me that. I was thinking it was somebody else less, but it was you that told me that. So PSEG does not only offers the time of use to people that are sourcing their energy through them.
I can't say that. I just know that I asked the Sun Nation people and they said, no, you can't use the time of use. So I don't know if it's just what they set up with PSE&G or it's everyone.
Okay, well, that's the thing we're researching. We're going to go back to PSEG and just clarify that so that if we are telling people that, it's in fact the case. But I can
Right.
understand the person's question that says we all are, if we're buying EVs, that we're environmentally conscious and would like to use green power. So it is a question that needs clarification.
Right.
We do use that.
For me, saving money is complicated by the fact that my company has charging and they provided at a discount of 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's
So you got other options. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Okay. I'm made of cost analysis buyer and not an environmental buyer. I am currently driving my second all-gas vehicle that's reached over 200,000 miles and still going strong. I heard when you said that batteries tend to last to about 100,000 miles. What's the cost of replacing the battery? Does the hybrid battery also have to be replaced after 100,000 miles on average? Does anybody want to take that question?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So typically that's what the warranty will cover up to, is about 100,000 miles or 10 years. But after various studies with Tesla vehicles or the Nissan Leafs that were used as taxi cabs, they saw that those vehicles actually, the battery life lasted much longer than that. And of course, EVs are still relatively new, so not a whole lot of them are around 10 years old at this point. So we're still learning. But I would expect that most of them will go far beyond just that $100,000 mile range. I think it will just continue. I don't think that you'll have to worry about replacing the entire battery after 100,000 miles, but in the event that you do, to replace the entire battery itself, it's around $10,000. But as I mentioned, those batteries are comprised of actually many smaller battery components, and those can be replaced individually as needed for much, much smaller costs. That $10,000 is to replace the entire battery.
And battery costs have been falling every year,
Yes.
as with new innovations. So
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Okay. Oh, Marco, who's an intern working for us this semester from Farmingdale State College, put in the chat the PSEG customer service number if you want information about the time of use rates. Marco did a mystery shopping presentation for us where he actually did it himself, so he knows he knows them by first name, all the people in that department.
Exactly. Yeah, I recommend giving them a call. You will not regret it.
Okay. Ken, I guess, has heard of there might be a zero sales tax on EVs that's being debated in New York State Senate. That would be nice. I just saw my Cooper Mini today, and we'll put this EV to good use. Very good. Glad to hear that. Okay, Marco also put some of the overnight rates that he researched for time of use. It's in the chat. Lucas says, for those who aren't aware, Middle Country Library has level 2 charging stations available at both our buildings. The first 2 hours are charging for free, and each subsequent hour costs $3. So come to the library and charge your vehicle and get some free charging. Great deal, Lucas. Okay, I found the AFDC website when I was doing my own research earlier. It seems to say that PSEG credit was for installation ending December 31st, 2021. The rebate on the home charger is still active. The PSEG used to have an incentive for workplace charging. That is no longer being offered. Now you get the New York State rebate for that. So that might be what they were referring to. The PSEG used to offer the more substantial rebate to help workplaces and public work charging stations. But they no longer are doing that, but they are focused on the home chargers up to $500. That's in place. Okay, and Marco points out that the cost to replace the battery is akin to replacing the entire engine or transmission of an ICE vehicle. That could seize and go too, but it usually doesn't.
Yeah, that's a good point, Marco. Thanks for that.
Okay, I just want to, if you want to stay on for a couple of minutes, I just want to give each of our EV owners a minute or two to just tell the group why you decided to go electric and what's your experience been. So Chris, why don't you get us started? Chris, are you still on? All right, I'm going to switch to Mark Gouch, who drives a Hyundai Ioniq.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been driving I bought a 2019 Ioniq electric vehicle, totally electric, about a year and a half ago. I bought it used, which was kind of interesting. I don't know really how the used market is, but my wife and I searched around for a while. We didn't find a lot at that time, but this was like August 2020, I guess. But I was always a bit of an environmentalist. I work in the environmental field. And when I had a 10-year-old car and needed to trade it in and started thinking, let's investigate electric vehicles. And so it is one of the things that I don't think has been mentioned so far is just how fun they are to drive, because they're silent, they're really spunky, faster pickup than a conventional old-fashioned internal combustion engine. I drive less than 50 miles to work a day. I charge it with my home charger, usually Tuesdays, Thursdays, and over the weekend, and it charges for 2 or 3, 4 hours overnight. The more I drive it, the more I enjoy it. I was talking to someone yesterday. I was trying to think of, what negative aspects do I have? I haven't really been able to find any, and it's fun. I drive to work through the woods in the summertime. I open the windows and I feel like I'm flying through the woods because there's no sound at all.
That's terrific.
And no maintenance. I want to add on to I think it was somebody was talking about in the cost analysis, Lisa, in 100,000 miles, there's no oil changes, almost no maintenance on an electric vehicle other than brakes, to my knowledge.
Because all the parts that we're used to, the transmission, the catalytic converters, the engine, they don't exist on an electric vehicle. It's just this, and all those are points of failure that could break and cost you $500 or $1,000 a pop. That's what seems to be the going rate at gas station and repair shops these days. Okay, Carl, talk to us about your Chevy Bolt.
So I actually started driving an electric car in 2013. I had one of the Nissan, and I hadn't, I mean, I had investigated it somewhat, but, you know, I was surprised how little I knew after I got it, you know. Well, luckily I got all the right features and stuff. Like I didn't really understand DC fast charging and all that, but I got to cover the DC fast charging, which was good. Because it was actually an option in the Leaf. Most cars it's not. The Bolt is an option too. It really shouldn't be. Everyone should buy it with the DC fast charge. But in any case, so I bought it mostly as an environmentalist. You know, I didn't really think a lot about how much more fun it was going to be to drive, all that, and how much money I was going to save. I was going to buy it regardless of how much money I saved. But I have saved a lot of money since then, and incredibly fun to drive. The Leaf was fun to drive, and the Bolt is twice as fun to drive. It had a lot of
Very nice.
features to it that we wished for with the Leaf, but they never added.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Carl.
I'll be driving
Lucas.
the car probably.
Lucas, tell us what it's been like having the Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid.
Yeah, so I really like it. Like I said in the chat, that Middle Country Library has the charging stations, so I'm able to charge every day, which is great. And most of my day-to-day driving is covered by the electric. Mine gets about 40 to 50 miles on electric only, and then it will have to start using gas. But yeah, for day-to-day driving, that's fine. I like the hybrid because if most of my driving is covered by electric, but if I have to go on a road trip or something, I don't have to worry about finding a station and waiting for a few hours. My car actually does make a noise at lower speeds, and especially reversing. I call it the angelic choir because it emits this like hum, and people always are very confused looking at my car when they hear it. But yeah, and the acceleration, like people have said, is great. Yeah, I really like it.
Okay. All right. And Kaylee, the Hyundai Ioniq?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I think it's so much fun, and I just can't tell you the savings, just in terms of operational costs as well as maintenance. I think I just couldn't say enough good things about it. And you know, we've road tripped in it before, and it's great. I mean, we stop at the DC fast stations. It's wonderful. You know, I just can't say enough good things about it. I don't think I would ever go back to a conventional vehicle.
Okay. Okay, now Marco, as I mentioned, is an intern for us at from Farmingdale State College, and he's been helping us to measure and track and get feedback on our programs. So Marco, can you tell them what we want them to do now?
Thank you. So please, everyone, can you take like just 2 minutes, not even, of your time to just fill out a quick survey, just letting us know your feedback, how we can improve the presentation, what your thoughts on it were, and if you are ready to either start your research or continue your research, or even go for a test drive at a dealership one day. But definitely, yes, just take the time to fill out the survey. You know, think of it as if like, your kid has a project that's due, you know, tomorrow, and you just, you know, got the poster board or something. But yeah, please, it'd be really, really amazing if you could just fill that out really quickly. Thank you.
And did you put the link in the chat?
Yes, the link is in the chat. Just click on it and you're good.
Okay. Okay, if anyone has any other questions now that you've heard, just unmute yourself and feel free to join in. I see a nice comment. Thank you all for the informative presentation. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. And if not, I'll turn it back to Lucas.
I have a question. So DC fast charging, what is the concern about battery degradation if you use it too much? Because I hear different stories about it. They say, don't worry, your car is under warranty. And I have a deal that I can use them for free for 2 years. So it's free charging for me, but it's like fast food for my car, they say. And I don't want to make my car sick. So what's the research? What information you can give me about that?
Yeah, from my own personal experience, after having, gosh, I think it's been 3 years now that I've had my vehicle. And I've done a couple trips using a lot of DC fast, and I have not noticed really anything in terms of battery degradation. I mean, I'm one who watches that and kind of studies it a little bit just because it's an interest of mine. And I can't say that it's anything significant, but I think it can be equated to charging your cell phone through the cigarette lighter in your car. You know how that can sometimes have some negative implications on your phone or your phone battery and have some degradation over time? The DC fast is quite comparable to that. But again, unless you're using it all the time, that's your only source of charging, and you're charging, I would say, every day, every other day with it, you will not notice any sort of degradation on your battery.
Marco, there's a question as to which event was the survey not updated to include this one?
No, it should be the EV 101 from Middle Country Library. Click on the link. It would be the first option on
Okay.
the form.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll turn it back to Lucas then.
All right, thank you, Rosemary, Kaylee, Marco, all the EV enthusiasts, and thank you for everyone for joining. I hope you learned something new. And that's it. Have a great night. Definitely contact. Do you mind, Rosemary and Kaylee dropping your email in the chat? Because I didn't catch it on the slide, in case anyone wants to contact you with any more questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And if anyone is interested in terms of help, you can subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out monthly and has different topics on electric vehicles. You can drop us a line and we'll send you those links, resource links that Kaylee was talking about that can help you sort through what vehicles are available, which would, based on what body style you're looking for. You're looking for a crossover, an SUV, a sedan, what range, what price range. There are tools that can help you do that. Or if you just want someone to talk to with it, you have some specific questions, you want a one-on-one consultation with one of our volunteers, we'll be happy to do that. So just drop us a line, let us know how we can help.
All right, perfect. Thank you all so much, and have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.